What would you do if your mother, dignified, gentle, a retired school principal, was humiliated in first class, asked to give up her seat for someone else just because she didn't look the part? Imagine sitting quietly, feeling the eyes of strangers on you, knowing deep down that the real reason for this injustice was never spoken aloud. But here's the twist. No one on that flight knew that Loretta Myers' son was a black tech CEO, one of the most influential men in the country. One phone call set in motion a chain of events that would shake an entire airline to its core. Would you have stood up in Loretta's shoes? Would you have remained silent to avoid conflict or demanded justice, no matter the cost? What happens when dignity meets discrimination at 30,000 feet? And how does a mother's quiet strength spark a national movement for change? As you listen, ask yourself, how far would you go to defend your loved one's dignity? How does one ordinary journey become a turning point for thousands? If this story moves you, or if you believe in a world where everyone deserves respect, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin the journey. Loretta Myers believed that travel revealed something about the world and something deeper about yourself. At 77, she no longer felt the thrill of airports, but she still appreciated the quiet rituals. That morning, the sun had barely risen over Augusta, Georgia, as Loretta buttoned her sky blue dress. She moved slowly, careful with the delicate pearls around her neck, a gift from her late husband the year their son Cameron left for college. Her hands, graceful and a little stiff from age, lingered on her small carry-on bag. Inside were the essentials: her Bible, a paperback novel she was determined to finish, a small tin of lemon drops, and a family photo from Thanksgiving, the kind where everyone's eyes were half closed, but the love was unmistakable. She checked her watch, then quietly sat by the window to savor a few moments of stillness, listening to the birds outside and feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and nerves. She was headed to Denver for what had become an annual tradition with her son, Cameron Myers, now CEO of Summit X Innovations. Loretta could still recall the little boy who once begged for a toy airplane and built cities out of cereal boxes on their living room rug. Now, Cameron's face appeared on the covers of business magazines, and his company powered the networks that connected cities and continents. For Cameron, time was always tight. He called as Loretta zipped up her bag, his voice bright but businesslike. "Morning, Mom. Are you ready for the big trip?" Loretta smiled into the phone, her tone gentle and a little teasing. "Good morning, Cam. You know I am. I packed last night and I am wearing my lucky shoes." She could hear him relax a little. "You sure you don't want me to send the company jet?" "Oh, no, honey. I like being among regular folks. Besides, I'm in first class. That's more than enough luxury for this old lady. Skyward America will take good care of you." "Mom, I made sure of it," Cameron said. Loretta only chuckled. "You can't control everything, son, but I trust you." As she ended the call, Loretta tucked away the familiar ache she always felt when leaving home, even for happy reasons. She locked the front door, checked the stove, and walked slowly down her driveway, feeling the early morning air wrap softly around her. Her neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, waved from across the street. "Safe travels, Loretta. Tell Cameron hello for me." Loretta waved back, warmth filling her chest. In her community, she was not just a retired principal, but a trusted friend, a church leader, and a living reminder of Augusta's best days and hardest nights at the Augusta Regional Airport. Loretta moved at her own careful pace. The terminal was alive with the familiar rhythms of rolling suitcases and hurried voices. She took her place in the Skyward America priority line, aware of the glances she received. Not unfriendly, but assessing. Sometimes she wondered if her presence in the first-class line looked out of place. She told herself not to care, but old habits lingered. Amanda Perez, the gate agent, greeted her with a polished smile. "Good morning. Ticket and ID, please." Loretta handed them over, her own smile unwavering. Amanda's eyes flicked to the first-class stamp, then back to Loretta. There was a moment, almost imperceptible. When Amanda's expression shifted, Loretta recognized it. She'd seen it 1,000 times in faculty meetings and parent-teacher nights. The look that asked, "Are you sure you belong here?" But Amanda said nothing, scanning the ticket with brisk efficiency. "Head right through to security. Ms. Myers. Boarding starts in about 90 minutes at Gate 7A, Amanda said. Loretta thanked her and made her way to the security checkpoint. As she waited in line, she glanced around at her fellow travelers, a young Asian-American man in a neat suit scrolling on his phone, an older white couple whispering to each other, a black woman in her 40s reviewing a thick folder of papers. Loretta wondered about their stories, who they were traveling to see, what they left behind. The security line crept forward. A TSA officer pointed at Loretta. "Ma'am, this way, please. Random screening." She nodded politely, stepping aside as others continued past. She had grown used to such interruptions, though she still wished they stung less. The officer's hands were gentle but impersonal as he swabbed her palms, checked her bag, and nodded her on. Loretta thanked him, her voice as calm as ever. Inside the waiting area, she chose a quiet corner and sat with her book open, though she read the same paragraph 3 times without moving forward. She was thinking of Denver, of Cameron, of what it meant to step on a plane in 2025 as a 77-year-old black woman from Georgia. She thought about the stories she used to tell her students, about resilience and dignity, about not letting the world tell you your place. She wondered, not for the first time, whether those lessons still meant as much as she hoped. As the waiting area filled, Loretta overheard snatches of conversation business calls, complaints about flight delays, laughter between friends. She watched a young man nervously checking his wedding ring, a nurse in scrubs studying her phone, a little girl tugging on her mother's sleeve and pointing at the planes outside. Her own thoughts wandered to her husband, Samuel, gone now 15 years. She missed his steady presence, the way he'd squeeze her hand before every trip and whisper, "Let's go see the world, Loretta." She missed the certainty that no matter where she went, she belonged, because she belonged with him. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cameron boarding soon. "Let me know when you're settled. Love you, Mom." Loretta typed back, "I will. Love you too." As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, Loretta stood and gathered her things. She glanced down at her boarding pass one last time, taking comfort in the neat block letters First Class, Skyward America, 1A. She walked to the gate with her back straight, her heart a curious blend of gratitude and anxiety. At the gate, Amanda greeted her again, a little less guarded this time. Loretta offered a warm "thank you" and stepped into the jet bridge, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation mixed with something else, something that felt like bracing for a test she had not chosen. Loretta stepped onto the plane, taking in the plush seats, the quiet lighting, and the smell of fresh coffee. for a moment, she allowed herself to feel proud of the journey, proud of her son, proud of her life. She did not know what lay ahead on this flight, only that she would meet it as she always had, with quiet strength. Eyes open, heart steady, Loretta Myers stood at the threshold of the aircraft, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the soft overhead lights and the muted blue-gray palette of Skyward America's first-class cabin. The flight attendant at the door wore a practiced smile, crisp in his Navy uniform. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Myers," said Brady Sullivan, reading from the passenger manifest, his tone even, but his gaze lingering half a second longer than necessary. Loretta met his eyes and offered a gentle smile. She had learned long ago that the best armor was graciousness, even if sometimes it felt like a mask she put on for the world's comfort. "Thank you. 1A. Is it up this way?" she asked, motioning down the left aisle. Brady nodded, stepping aside. "Just there. Ma'am. First seat on the left." Loretta made her way to her pod, suitcase wheels humming softly on the plush carpet. As she settled into the wide, cream leather seat, she felt the eyes of several passengers on her, some with simple curiosity, others with the familiar mixture of surprise and silent calculation. It was the look that measured her age, her skin, her presence in this space. She tucked her bag beneath the seat and arranged her shawl on her lap, reminding herself that she belonged here, across the aisle. A man in an expensive charcoal suit glanced up from his tablet, quickly shifting his gaze as Loretta looked his way. He was white, early 60s, the kind of man Loretta had worked alongside in school board meetings and city committees, sometimes as an equal, more often not. She gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. He returned it with a stiff smile before returning to his reading. As more passengers filed in, Loretta became aware of small moments that, by themselves, seemed innocent, but in chorus formed a quiet refrain of exclusion. When a younger white woman with platinum hair settled into 2B, Brady Sullivan greeted her with a breezy familiarity. "Welcome back, Ms. Whitman. Champagne for you and Mr. Whitman." Today, Loretta watched as the woman, Charlotte Whitman, gave a little wave and nodded toward the man in the suit. Gregory, the Whitmans, Loretta realized. She recognized the name from the business section, big donors and socialites from Colorado. The contrast in greeting did not escape her. She pressed her fingers lightly together, feeling a familiar sadness mingle with resolve. Leah Anderson, the support flight attendant, approached with a tray of drinks. Leah's smile was tentative as she paused at Loretta's seat. "Can I offer you a pre-flight beverage, Ms. Myers? We have orange juice, water, and sparkling wine." "Just water, please," Loretta replied, offering her thanks. Leah nodded, returning a moment later with a tall glass. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it on Loretta's tray. Loretta sensed uncertainty, maybe even discomfort, in the young woman's posture. She considered saying something reassuring, but instead offered only a soft, "Thank you. I appreciate it." As the cabin filled, Loretta overheard snippets of conversation between the flight crew at the galley curtain. Their words were hushed, but her seat was close enough to catch the gist. "She's the one in 1A," Brady's voice, clipped and low. "Yeah, I double-checked her ticket. It's first class, all right," Leah responded. There was a pause, the kind that filled the air with unspoken meaning. "Well, I hope there aren't any issues. The Whitmans are platinum status. They booked late and always expect the best. Just be prepared," Brady said. Loretta's chest tightened. She stared at her hands, resting atop the Bible in her lap, and tried to focus on the gentle rhythm of her breath. She thought of all the times she had been asked, politely or otherwise, to wait her turn or step aside. How sometimes the request had come with a smile, sometimes with a look. Now, even in this rarefied air, the script remained the same. Passengers continued to board. Amanda Perez, the gate agent, appeared in the aisle, speaking softly with Leah. Loretta caught her own name mentioned, followed by a series of rapid, professional nods. Amanda's eyes flicked to Loretta and away just as quickly. Loretta closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the soft hum of the engines and the murmur of conversation to ground her. She opened her book, trying to distract herself, but her mind wandered. She remembered a story she once shared with her fifth-grade class about a little black girl in 1950s Georgia who was told she couldn't drink from the whites-only water fountain. The class had been shocked and indignant, asking. What did she do? Loretta had answered. She found another way, and she kept her head high. She wondered now if that answer had been enough. Did her students understand that dignity sometimes meant swallowing anger, sometimes meant simply refusing to disappear? The pre-flight safety demonstration began. Loretta listened politely as Leah demonstrated the seatbelt and oxygen mask, her hands moving with a practiced routine. Beside her, the Whitmans whispered, sharing a private joke, their laughter soft but unmistakably exclusive. A few rows back, a young black woman with striking glasses, Monique Evans, Loretta would later learn, watched the proceedings with quiet intensity. On the opposite side, Kevin Tran, in business attire, looked up from his laptop and offered Loretta a supportive smile. Their acknowledgement felt like a small but meaningful lifeline. As the cabin doors closed, Amanda Perez made her final sweep, ensuring everyone was seated. She stopped briefly at Loretta's row. "Ms. Myers, do you need any assistance settling in?" Her tone was overly formal, polite yet distant. Loretta shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm all set." Amanda lingered for a heartbeat, her expression unreadable, then moved on. As the plane taxied, Brady Sullivan made an announcement welcoming passengers aboard and highlighting the exceptional service reserved for Skyward America's most valued customers. Loretta heard the coded message behind those words. She shifted in her seat, feeling the weight of invisible scrutiny pressing in from all sides. The aircraft accelerated, engines roaring, pressing Loretta gently into her seat. For a few moments, as the ground fell away beneath them, she felt a fleeting sense of freedom, a suspension of the old rules, as if in the clouds all things might be possible. But as soon as the seatbelt sign dinged off, reality settled in again. Brady moved swiftly down the aisle, checking on the Whitmans before glancing in Loretta's direction. "Ms. Myers, if you need anything during the flight, just let us know," he said, his voice polite but cool. Loretta nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." He hesitated, then moved on. For the next hour, Loretta watched the landscape change outside her window. She sipped her water, flipped pages in her novel, and tried to let herself feel lucky. She was here, in first class, on her way to see her son. But beneath the surface, she could not shake the uneasy sense that at any moment, her presence in this space might be questioned again. She thought of her son, Cameron, his reassurance echoing in her mind, You belong here, Mom. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." She smiled, the memory giving her strength, but she also wondered, not for the first time, if belonging was ever truly hers to claim, or something she had to defend, over and over, with a graciousness that sometimes felt like surrender. At the end of the aisle, Leah Anderson paused, catching Loretta's eye. There was an apology in the young woman's gaze, a flicker of solidarity, before she hurried off to the next passenger. Loretta held on to that small gesture, letting it warm a corner of her heart. As the flight sailed westward, Loretta closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer for courage, for patience, and for the simple hope that this journey, like so many before, would bring her safely home to herself. Loretta Myers watched sunlight stream through the small oval window, gilding the cabin in pale gold. For a moment, she let her thoughts drift, remembering the simple joys of her first year's teaching, the hush of a classroom just before the bell, the thrill of watching her students discover their own gifts. She was startled back by the sound of heels and a clipped voice in the aisle. Brady Sullivan moved briskly through first class, checking seat assignments with the authority of someone who believed every detail reflected on him. Loretta noticed the way he greeted the Whitmans with a personal touch, asking after Gregory's back surgery, congratulating Charlotte on her recent award for philanthropy. Charlotte responded with laughter and a squeeze of Brady's arm, already at ease in this floating world of exclusivity. Loretta sat quietly in 1A, straightening the edges of her book and tucking her feet neatly beneath her seat. She listened as Samantha Price, the young nurse with a gentle voice, asked if she might store her bag in the overhead bin. Brady answered with a warm, "Of course, let me help you with that," then immediately turned to double-check that the business traveler in 1D had the right meal preference. When he reached Loretta, Brady's tone was perfectly polite, yet lacked the unguarded warmth reserved for his regulars. "Ms. Myers, I see you're all settled. Let me know if you need anything before we depart." His words hung in the air, almost daring her to make a request. "Thank you. I'm fine for now," Loretta replied, her voice serene. Passengers continued to board, and with each arrival, Loretta felt the tension in the cabin rise, as if every new set of eyes recalibrated the rules of belonging. She tried not to notice the sideways glances, but they came all the same. A couple from Texas with monogrammed luggage, a middle-aged man in golf attire who gave Loretta a once-over before claiming his window seat, a woman with a tight bun and AirPods who snapped, "Excuse me," as she squeezed past, across the aisle. Gregory Whitman watched Loretta with open curiosity. Charlotte leaned in, whispering behind her hand, her gaze flickering briefly in Loretta's direction. Loretta's shoulders tightened, and she focused on the pattern of light and shadow on the seat in front of her. In her mind, she retreated to a memory of her childhood home in Georgia. The porch swings creaking on humid afternoons. Her mother's gentle admonition, always meet ignorance with dignity. Never let it poison your heart. She took a slow, steady breath and tried to let that lesson ground her. Suddenly, the overhead bins banged shut. Leah Anderson, working quickly, flashed Loretta a tentative smile before moving to assist another passenger. Kevin Tran, the Vietnamese-American businessman, caught Loretta's eye and nodded, a brief gesture of camaraderie. Loretta returned the nod, grateful for this tiny island of kindness. As boarding neared completion, Amanda Perez entered the cabin for a final head count. Her eyes darted from screen to screen, lips pressed into a thin line. When she reached Loretta, she hesitated, then forced a smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Myers. Let us know if you need anything during the flight." Loretta thanked her. Amanda's gaze softened just a bit, perhaps recognizing the strain in Loretta's smile, perhaps recalling a similar moment in her own life. Then she was gone, and Loretta was once again a figure alone at the front of the cabin, exposed by proximity and position. Brady took the intercom and welcomed everyone aboard Skyward America's Flight 2772 nonstop service from Augusta to Denver. He listed the amenities, praised the culinary team, and reminded everyone that their comfort was the crew's highest priority. His words flowed over Loretta, strangely hollow. Charlotte Whitman raised her hand, her rings catching the light. "Brady, would you mind bringing me a warm towel and perhaps something to help me relax? It was such a stressful morning." "Of course, Charlotte." "Right away," Brady replied, voice suddenly rich with warmth. Loretta pressed her lips together. She thought of the times she had played hostess at parent-teacher nights, pouring punch and making sure every family felt welcome. She wondered why it was so easy for some to belong, while others were always waiting to be told where they didn't fit. The plane lurched slightly as it pulled away from the gate. Leah moved through the aisle, offering mints and magazines. When she reached Loretta, her voice was soft. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Loretta smiled. "I'm fine, thank you. You're very kind." Leah paused, as if she wanted to say something more, then moved on. In the row behind, Monique Evans began typing on her phone, her eyes flicking occasionally toward Loretta. She noticed every detail, cataloging small injustices as only a seasoned attorney could. As the plane taxied, the man in golf attire muttered, "Never seen so many first-timers in first class." His companion grunted in agreement. Loretta pretended not to hear, but the words stung. She focused on the safety demonstration, listening as Leah's voice trembled ever so slightly over the intercom, behind the practiced routine. Loretta sensed a nervousness, the knowledge that something unspoken pulsed beneath the surface of this polished scene. As the engines roared to life, Loretta squeezed the armrest and closed her eyes, whispering a prayer for safe travel. When she opened them again, she watched the ground recede, Georgia's green patchwork slowly replaced by a sea of clouds. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to move through the world without constantly measuring her own presence. Soon after reaching cruising altitude, Brady made his rounds, offering drinks. He lingered at the Whitman's row, exchanging inside jokes. When he reached Loretta, his tone was polite but perfunctory. "Ms. Myers, would you like anything from the bar?" "Just a ginger ale." "Please," Loretta said. He nodded and moved on, returning with her drink and little fanfare. Throughout the cabin, the atmosphere was one of muted exclusivity, a world built on invisible rules. Loretta took small comfort in the occasional kindnesses, a smile from Kevin, a wordless offer from Samantha to help with her tray, a glance from Monique that said, "I see you." As the hours slipped by, Loretta drifted in and out of thought. She considered her son, Cameron, and all he had accomplished, the way he moved through boardrooms with the same quiet dignity she had tried to teach him. She hoped that, for his sake, the world had changed more than it sometimes seemed. A sudden commotion near the galley broke her reverie. Brady and Amanda were speaking in low, urgent tones. Charlotte Whitman stood, voice raised in irritation. "I'm sorry, but we specifically requested seats together. This is unacceptable, Charlotte insisted. Gregory added, our status is platinum. We expect a certain level of service. Amanda held up her tablet, her expression strained. I'm doing my best. Mr. and Mrs. Whitman, let me check again. Loretta felt a wave of unease ripple through the cabin. She glanced at her boarding pass, then at the empty seat beside her. Her stomach tightened as Amanda and Brady exchanged glances. In that moment, Loretta understood what was coming. She remembered too many times in her life when comfort, stability, even joy had been snatched away at the last minute. She braced herself, holding on to her dignity as tightly as she held onto the armrest. Monique watched closely, her phone now recording discreetly at her side. Kevin frowned, sensing trouble. Leah hovered uncertainly near the galley, her hands twisting together. Brady straightened his jacket, face set. Amanda approached Loretta's row, her smile now gone. Ms. Myers, may I see your boarding pass for just a moment? Loretta handed it over, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Amanda studied the document, then exchanged a quiet word with Brady. He nodded, then turned to Loretta, his voice measured but unmistakably firm. I'm afraid there's been a mistake with the seating assignment. Ms. Myers, we'll need to move you to another seat further back in the cabin. It's an operational issue. Around them, the cabin grew quiet. Eyes turned. The air was suddenly thick with expectation, judgment, and something like fear. Loretta kept her voice calm, her gaze unwavering. My ticket says first class. This is the seat I was assigned. Amanda's cheeks flushed. Brady stepped in. We're asking for your cooperation. Ma'am, the Whitmans are platinum members. We hope you understand. Monique set down her phone and stood, her voice clear and calm. Is there a safety issue here? If not, it seems this passenger has every right to remain in her seat. Brady frowned, glancing at Amanda, who shook her head. I'm sorry for the confusion, but we do need to move you. Ms. Myers, Amanda repeated, voice now brittle with stress. Loretta exhaled slowly. She felt a familiar burn of humiliation in her chest, but refused to show it. She glanced at the faces around her, some sympathetic, some smug, some averted in awkward silence. She had made her way through worse storms than this, and she would weather this one too. She gathered her shawl, nodded once, and with as much dignity as she could summon, prepared to stand. The conflict, she knew, was only just beginning. As Loretta Myers slowly stood, her heart beat heavily against her ribs. The moment felt both surreal and painfully familiar, as if she were standing on two timelines at once. In one, she was a girl in rural Georgia, forced to give up her seat at a lunch counter. In the other, she was a respected elder, a mother and grandmother, her life and dignity compressed into a boarding pass. She folded her shawl neatly, setting her book and water on the tray, hands steady though her breath felt tight. The silence in the first-class cabin grew more pronounced with every second. People watched, some with uncomfortable curiosity, others with veiled satisfaction. She heard the low buzz of Charlotte Whitman's whisper, felt the weight of Gregory's expectant stare. The invisible lines of class, race, and privilege became ropes, drawing the boundaries of who was welcomed and who was not. Brady Sullivan took the lead, his face carefully composed, voice honeyed but firm. Ms. Myers, I'm very sorry, but due to a last-minute adjustment, we have to reseat you. Your new seat will still be comfortable and will make sure you have everything you need." His words were so practiced that for a moment Loretta almost believed them. Almost. She met his eyes with a quiet challenge. "May I ask why it's my seat that must be changed? I have a first-class ticket and have already settled in." Brady glanced at Amanda Perez, who shifted her weight and looked down at her tablet. Amanda was careful, as if this decision came from a place beyond her own control, but Loretta saw the strain in her eyes. "It's an operational decision. Ma'am, we have a couple with platinum status who need to sit together for medical reasons," Amanda recited, her voice wavering just enough to betray uncertainty. Loretta's eyes flickered toward the Whitmans. Charlotte clutched Gregory's hand, nodding along, her lips pressed in a sympathetic pout that felt like performance. Gregory adjusted his tie, avoiding Loretta's gaze. Monique Evans, still seated nearby, raised her phone to her chest, quietly recording. She spoke up, her tone measured but carrying weight. "I'm sorry, but it appears Ms. Myers was here first. If the issue is medical, shouldn't accommodations be made elsewhere, especially if there are other open seats Brady's patients thinned? Ma'am, we ask for your cooperation. This is a sensitive matter. We'd like to handle it with as little disruption as possible." Loretta felt a wave of heat climb her neck. She steadied herself, refusing to let her voice betray the ache in her chest. She remembered the lessons of her youth, the admonition to remain calm, the warnings that any show of resistance would be used against her. But she also remembered her father's words, "Never mistake dignity for silence." She lifted her chin. "I understand you want to keep things calm, but I must say, it feels like I'm being asked to move because I don't fit the picture you want for your first-class cabin." Brady stiffened, glancing nervously at the nearby passengers. Amanda's cheeks reddened, her fingers flying across her tablet. Charlotte gasped quietly, as if Loretta's honesty were a breach of etiquette greater than any seating mix-up. The tension was shattered as Derek Hobbs, the security officer, stepped into the cabin. He wore his uniform with the air of someone used to obedience, hand resting casually near his belt. He addressed Loretta with professional politeness, but his presence was a warning. "Ma'am, the crew has authority to make seating decisions for operational reasons. We're asking you to please comply so we can proceed with departure." Loretta knew this script too well. She felt her shoulders square with resolve. Around her, the passengers seemed frozen. Kevin Tran half rose from his seat as if to intervene, then sat back, jaw clenched. Leah Anderson watched with visible distress from the galley, her hands nervously wringing the corner of a napkin. Loretta kept her voice level. "I understand your position, officer, but I would like it noted that I'm being removed from a seat I purchased, with no clear explanation, while others who arrived later are allowed to stay." Derek shifted his feet, not meeting her eyes. "Understood, ma'am, but if you don't comply, we'll have to ask you to deplane." Loretta looked around, her gaze steady and unafraid. She saw sympathy in Samantha Price's eyes, anger in Monique's, averted gazes from others. She saw the old calculation: was it worth the risk to speak up? Was it safer to stay silent and disappear into the crowd? Her thoughts flickered to Cameron. Her son. What would he want her to do? She remembered his words as a boy, after a white teacher tried to keep him out of the advanced math class. "Don't let them move you." "Mama," he'd said, fists balled in childish anger, "you stay where you belong." She wanted to stay, to make a stand for every person who had ever been told to give up their seat. But Loretta also knew the price that sometimes came with refusing. She felt the ache in her back, the fatigue in her bones, and the cold calculation that even now, in 2025, dignity was something black women had to protect at their own risk. She took a slow breath. Under protest, I will move, but I want it clearly stated that I am not moving willingly, and I expect this to be addressed by your company. Brady nodded, relief flooding his face. Amanda quickly printed a new boarding pass and handed it to Loretta, her voice barely audible. You'll be in 27E. I'm sorry, Ms. Myers. Loretta took the slip of paper. She gathered her things with meticulous care, refusing to rush. As she stepped into the aisle, Monique Evans stood and handed her a business card. If you need representation or just someone to witness, I'm here. Monique whispered. This isn't right. Loretta's lips trembled, but she steadied them with a grateful smile. Thank you, dear. I appreciate it. She moved past rows of silent faces, each one a silent jury. As she walked, she felt her composure threaten to crumble, but she held herself tall. Each step was heavier than the last. When she reached the economy section, a middle seat awaited her between a broad-shouldered man in headphones and a mother juggling a restless toddler. The seat was tight, the air stale. Loretta struggled to place her carry-on, the motion jarring her shoulder. Leah Anderson appeared at her side. Ms. Myers, can I help you with anything? Her voice was low, almost apologetic. Loretta shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Leah squeezed her shoulder gently, then hurried away. Once settled, Loretta closed her eyes and tried to center herself. She thought of her late husband, Samuel, his steady presence on difficult days. She imagined him beside her now, whispering encouragement, reminding her that storms pass but the roots of dignity run deep. The plane had not yet left the gate. Overhead, she heard the announcement, all passengers, please take your seats for on-time departure. Brady Sullivan passed by her new row, his eyes sliding over her as if she were invisible. From several rows back, Samantha Price leaned forward, voice low. That was wrong. What they did to you. Loretta smiled sadly. It happens more often than you'd think. As the engines finally started, Loretta glanced out the small window. The airport tarmac shimmered in the Georgia heat. She could almost hear the echo of past injustices buses she'd once been forced to the back of. Doors closed in her face. But she also felt the echo of survival, the quiet pride in her heart that would not be erased by one act of disrespect. She reached for her phone, hands trembling. She called Cameron, her son. The call went to voicemail in a calm but clipped voice. Loretta left a message. Cameron, it's Mom. There's been a little incident on my flight. I was moved out of first class for some supposed operational reason. I'll explain when I land. Don't worry, I'm all right. Love you. She ended the call and put the phone away. All around her, the plane was settling in for takeoff, but inside, Loretta's spirit was anything but settled. In the forward cabin, the Whitmans stretched comfortably into their seats. Charlotte beamed at Brady, who brought her a glass of champagne. Gregory nodded in satisfaction. Clearly content with the arrangement, Loretta saw none of it, but she could feel its meaning in her bones. As the plane taxied down the runway, Loretta stared straight ahead, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She would not let them fall. She would not let the world see her break. Not now. Not ever. As Loretta Myers pressed herself into the narrow middle seat in 27E, the hum of the aircraft around her felt strangely muffled, as if the walls of the cabin had thickened and she was sitting behind glass. The air was heavy with the quiet aftermath of confrontation. Her arms brushed uncomfortably against her new seatmates, a stocky man in faded jeans, lost in his headphones, and a weary mother with a restless toddler whose soft cries seemed to echo the ache in Loretta's own heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing her breathing to steady. The events in first class replayed with relentless clarity: Amanda's brittle apology, Brady's dismissive tone, the way Charlotte Whitman had smiled as if nothing at all had happened. Loretta felt the burn of humiliation on her cheeks, followed by the colder, more familiar ache of disappointment. For a few minutes, she had truly believed that this flight would be simple, even joyful. She had believed she could just be a mother on her way to see her son. In the cramped space, every gesture became a negotiation. Loretta folded her shawl and tucked her knees as close together as possible. She reached for her bag beneath the seat and realized, with an absurd twist of irritation, that the zipper had caught on something. The man to her left noticed her struggle and, wordlessly, shifted his legs to make room. Loretta nodded her thanks, grateful for this tiny civility. Behind her, a pair of teenage boys whispered, occasionally glancing at her and then at the front of the plane. Loretta wondered if they had seen what happened. She wondered how many people on this flight had quietly recorded her removal. How many had posted about it already? The thought brought a shiver of both dread and possibility. Suddenly, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself looking up at Monique Evans, who had maneuvered back from the first-class section. Monique's eyes were sharp, her jaw set in a line of determination. "Ms. Myers," she said softly, "I wanted to check on you. What happened up there isn't right. I saw the whole thing and I have it on video. I'm a civil rights attorney. If you want to take this further, or if you just want someone to listen, I'm here." Loretta blinked, momentarily overwhelmed by gratitude and a surge of hope. "Thank you, Ms. Evans. I appreciate your kindness. Sometimes it feels like you have to fight the same battles over and over." Monique nodded. "You shouldn't have to. Not anymore." As Monique returned to her seat, Kevin Tran caught Loretta's eye from across the aisle. He mouthed, "Are you okay?" Loretta gave a small, honest shake of her head. Kevin frowned, then quickly sent a text on his phone. Meanwhile, up in first class, the energy was entirely different. Charlotte Whitman laughed, her voice ringing with relief as she toasted her husband. Finally, a little peace and quiet, she quipped, accepting another glass of champagne from Brady Sullivan, who now appeared entirely at ease. Amanda Perez retreated to the galley, her hands shaking as she organized stacks of napkins she did not need. The guilt lingered in her chest like a stone. She scrolled through her messages and saw that several passengers had tagged the airline's official account in posts. One was a video of Loretta gathering her belongings, her dignity painfully intact as she walked past the silent, expensive seats back in 27E. The mother beside Loretta finally managed to soothe her toddler, settling him with a juice box and a tablet. She turned to Loretta, voice gentle. "If you need to get out, just let me know. It's tight in here. I saw what happened. I'm sorry. That was hard to watch." "Thank you," Loretta replied quietly, I'm all right. It's not the first time." The mother sighed. It shouldn't happen at all. A few rows up, Samantha Price, the nurse, caught Monique's eye. With a subtle nod, Samantha indicated her willingness to provide a witness statement. Monique smiled, reassured by the solidarity blooming quietly among strangers. As the flight cruised at 35,000 feet, Loretta tried to disappear into her novel, but the words blurred on the page. Her mind wandered to Cameron, picturing him in his Dallas office, sleeves rolled, voice calm but firm, as he made decisions that shaped the fortunes of entire industries. She wondered if she should have resisted more, if she should have demanded to speak to a supervisor or threatened to call the press right there in first class. But she also knew, deep down, that her quiet dignity was not surrender. It was a legacy, one passed down from her own mother and her mother before that. Dignity did not mean silence, but it did mean choosing one's battles and choosing how to fight them. She replayed the faces Amanda's nervous apology, Brady's cold professionalism, the Whitman's smug contentment. She felt herself growing angrier, not at the discomfort of Coach or even at the disrespect itself, but at the feeling that she had been made invisible. It was not just about a seat. It was about what that seat represented, about who was considered worthy and who was not. Suddenly, a turbulence warning chimed and the plane jolted, rattling drinks and causing a wave of murmured concern. Loretta gripped the armrests, willing herself not to flinch. The toddler beside her began to cry again. But his mother comforted him, brushing his curls with soothing hands. From the galley. Leah Anderson hurried down the aisle to check on passengers. When she reached Loretta, her expression softened. "Are you all right, Ms. Myers? Can I bring you anything?" Loretta thought for a moment, then asked simply, "May I have a glass of water?" "Please." Leah nodded, her eyes lingering on Loretta's face. "Right away." The turbulence passed, but the mood in the cabin did not lighten. More than a few passengers glanced at Loretta with new awareness. Some, like the teenage boys, looked uncomfortable. Others, like Samantha and Kevin, looked quietly resolved. Loretta sipped her water, feeling her throat relax. She opened her phone and saw that she had received several messages from Cameron, asking if she had landed yet, if she was all right, if she needed anything. She replied simply, "I'm fine. I'll call you soon." She did not add the truth. Not yet. Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, Amanda reviewed the passenger manifest and realized that not only had Loretta's removal been unnecessary, there were still empty seats available. The operational reason she'd been instructed to cite was paper thin, and Amanda's conscience ached. She looked up and caught Leah's eye. The younger woman shook her head ever so slightly, a silent communication between two people who knew the truth. Monique Evans, unable to stay silent, opened her laptop and began drafting an email to her firm, summarizing the incident and attaching the video she had recorded. She also began composing a social media post, careful to keep Loretta's identity private, but making clear the injustice she had witnessed. Back in her seat, Loretta found herself caught between anger and exhaustion. She recalled her first days as a teacher, the battles she'd fought for her students to have new textbooks, to have their history told, to be believed in. She realized that this flight, this humiliating moment, was simply another chapter in the long work of insisting on one's own value. Samantha Price, on her way back from the lavatory, stopped by Loretta's row. "If you need someone to speak up for you, I'll do it." You handled that better than I would have." Loretta smiled. "Grateful. Thank you. Sometimes I wish I could be louder, but sometimes quiet strength has its own power." Samantha nodded. "It does, and you have plenty." By the time the pilot announced their initial descent into Denver, the story of what had happened had already started to ripple through the aircraft. Passengers whispered, others scrolled through posts and videos, and more than one person messaged friends or family with outrage. Loretta gazed out the window, watching the clouds part over the Rockies. She thought again of Cameron, of the life she had built and the son she had raised to never accept injustice. Whatever happened next, she knew she was not alone. The silent support of strangers was more powerful than she had imagined, and in the rising sense of collective conscience, she felt the first stirrings of hope. She would call Cameron. She would tell him everything, and she would not let this story end quietly. The plane began its descent, wheels trembling as they lowered through cloud. Denver's mountains spread in the distance, their peaks tinged pink by the late afternoon sun. Loretta Myers stared out at that sweep of sky, her heart a whirl of emotions: anger, shame, fatigue, but also a quiet, rising clarity. The cabin seemed smaller, closer now, as passengers packed up their bags and checked their phones. Loretta's fingers tapped quietly at her lap. She felt the imprints of every seat she had occupied in her life, from the back row of segregated buses to now moved out of first class, again asked to yield. She was tired, deeply so, but she was also awake in a new way. This story would not end with silence. The mother beside her buckled her toddler in, then turned to Loretta and spoke softly, her voice nearly drowned out by the crackle of the intercom. "I hope you have someone waiting for you," the woman said, her eyes warm but sad. "No one deserves what happened up there. If you need anything, I live in Denver. My name's Rachel." Loretta squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you. Rachel, I do have someone. My son is meeting me. He worries, even when I tell him not to." Rachel smiled, then turned her attention to her son, but Loretta felt the comfort of simple human solidarity. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin for one final check, Loretta watched Leah Anderson approach. The young woman stopped by Loretta's row and knelt down, her voice pitched low. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened, Ms. Myers. I can't change it. I wish I could." For a moment, Loretta saw the fatigue in Leah's eyes, the exhaustion of someone new in her career, caught between rules and right, perhaps burdened with private battles of her own. "Thank you for saying so." Loretta replied quietly, "Not everyone would." Leah nodded, biting her lip, then hurried away as Brady Sullivan called her back to the front. Loretta followed Leah with her eyes, noting how quickly the mask of composure slid back into place. The cabin was filled with the ritual bustle of landing seat backs upright, trays stowed, strangers sharing brief, tired glances. Kevin Tran, gathering his briefcase, leaned into the aisle as he passed Loretta. "If you want to share your story, I work for a media group," he whispered. "You don't have to be quiet. There are people who'll listen." Loretta managed a grateful smile, but her mind was already racing ahead. She thought of Cameron, waiting somewhere beyond baggage claim, likely refreshing his flight tracker app every few minutes. She wondered what she would tell him, how much of the pain she could share without it becoming a burden he could not set down. Up in first class, Charlotte and Gregory Whitman prepared to exit the plane, chatting amiably about their dinner reservations in Denver and what wines to bring for their weekend guests. Neither of them so much as glanced back at the economy rose. Brady Sullivan, professional to the end, checked in one more time, offering them hot towels and a final smile. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, the cabin erupted in a scramble. Overhead, bins clicked open, elbows jostled, voices swelled in a gentle, relieved cacophony. Loretta stayed seated, accustomed to the rhythm of waiting. She had long ago learned the patience of letting others rush, content to keep her own pace. Samantha Price paused beside Loretta's row, her eyes kind and searching. "You handled that with so much grace," Samantha said quietly. "I don't know if I could have." Loretta reached for Samantha's hand, squeezed it gently. "Sometimes we surprise ourselves. Thank you for caring." Monique Evans gathered her laptop and business card, ready to accompany Loretta if needed. She leaned close, her voice firm. "I'll walk out with you. If anyone tries to stop you or question you, I'll be there." Loretta nodded, her chest swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Monique. I'm glad to have you beside me." They filed off the plane, row by row. When Loretta reached the front of the cabin, she paused for a moment. Brady Sullivan stood by the exit, mask of polite indifference firmly in place. "Thank you for flying with us, Ms. Myers," he said, his voice flat. Loretta looked him in the eye, her voice gentle but unwavering. "I hope you remember today, not just for the company's sake, but for your own." Brady's face flickered. Then he looked away. Amanda Perez waited on the jet bridge, arms crossed, trying to look busy with her tablet. As Loretta passed, Amanda offered a barely audible, "Sorry." Loretta did not respond. She stepped into the corridor, feeling the cool blast of Denver air, her dignity intact. The terminal at Denver International Airport was alive with reunions and rushed departures. As Loretta emerged, she spotted Cameron Myers waiting near the security checkpoint, tall and sharply dressed in a navy suit. Even from a distance, his presence was unmistakable, steady, magnetic, the kind of man whose authority was quiet but absolute. Cameron's face broke into relief as he spotted his mother. He strode forward, arms open. "There you are, Mom. I was starting to worry." Loretta smiled, letting herself rest for a moment in his embrace. "Sorry, I'm late. Son, it's been quite a flight." Cameron immediately sensed the edge in her voice. He held her at arm's length, searching her face. "What happened?" he asked, tone sharpening. Before Loretta could answer, Monique Evans stepped forward, business card in hand. "Mr. Myers, I'm Monique Evans, an attorney and a witness to what happened on your mother's flight. She was moved from first class to coach without justification. I have the incident on video. There are multiple witnesses willing to come forward." Cameron's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "Thank you, Ms. Evans. I appreciate you staying with my mother. Mom, is that true?" Loretta nodded, keeping her voice calm. "Yes, it is. They said it was for operational reasons. But I think you know the real reason. Cameron, it was because of who I am and what I look like." Cameron's face shifted pain, then anger, then the cool determination of a man used to power. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Loretta took a breath. "I am. I had help from good people." Cameron put a protective arm around her. "Let's get your bags. I want to hear everything." As they walked toward baggage claim, Samantha Price and Kevin Tran caught up, introducing themselves and offering their support. "We saw everything," Kevin said, "and we'll back up whatever you say." Samantha nodded. "You deserve better, Miss Myers." The group walked together, strangers bound by a single act of injustice. Loretta felt something loosen in her chest, the beginnings of healing seeded by simple acts of kindness. While waiting for her luggage, Loretta recounted the story for Cameron and Monique, each detail sparking fresh waves of disbelief and outrage in her son. He asked for Monique's video, then watched it silently, face a mask of control. "Thank you," he said when it finished, voice hard as stone. "This will not stand." He excused himself for a moment, making a series of brisk, quiet phone calls. Loretta could only imagine the gears turning Summit X Innovations. Her son's empire held enough sway to shake any boardroom in America. For years, Cameron had kept a low profile about his family, insisting that respect must be earned and not forced. Now, Loretta could see in his eyes the same resolve she had nurtured since he was a child, the refusal to accept disrespect, for himself or anyone he loved. As they left the terminal, a soft wind blowing across the pavement, Loretta caught Cameron's eye. She squeezed his hand. "Don't go to war for me, son," she said quietly. "I want change, not vengeance." Cameron nodded, eyes shining. "I know, Mom, but sometimes change only comes when you stand up and demand it." As they stepped into the Denver evening, Loretta looked up at the vast sky and thought of all the women who had come before her, who had endured, who had waited, who had quietly changed the world one act of courage at a time. This time, she vowed, her story would not fade into the background. This time, the world would listen. Night was falling when Loretta and Cameron Myers reached his car, the terminal behind them ablaze in golden airport light. The walk through the parking garage was quiet at first. Cameron wheeled Loretta's suitcase with the same care he had once reserved for science projects and fragile trophies. His jaw set in that familiar way Loretta had seen only a handful of times before, a look that meant he was both calculating and furious. Inside the car, the hush was broken by the sharp click of Cameron's phone as he scrolled through Monique Evans' video once more. He watched it from start to finish. Every detail recorded Loretta's calm protest, Amanda's faltering explanations, the silence of the other passengers, and, finally, Loretta's solitary walk down the aisle. With each second, his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Loretta sat beside him, hands folded neatly, her gaze drifting from her son's face to the distant city lights. She felt exhausted, but she also felt the fragile hope of having been seen by Monique, by Kevin, by Samantha, by Rachel, and the other small acts of kindness that had softened the sharp edges of humiliation. She watched as Cameron, always so measured, tried to steady himself before speaking. "Mom, did anyone lay a hand on you?" he asked, his voice controlled but edged with anger. Loretta shook her head gently. "No, baby. They didn't have to. That's not how these things happen anymore. Is it? They just move you out of sight?" Cameron drew a shaky breath, pressing the phone to his chest. "You know this isn't going away. I need to call the CEO of Skyward America. I want to know who gave that order, and I want them to answer for it." Loretta looked at her son, tall, powerful, respected by Fortune 500 leaders across the country. She remembered the child who came home from school in tears the first time he was called a name that didn't fit. The young man who worked late into the night, building his first business with hope and rage in equal measure. She saw now that no matter how far he'd come, there were some things no success could insulate him from. "Cameron," Loretta said softly, "promise me you'll use your voice for something more than punishment. I want to see them held accountable. But what I want even more is to see the next Loretta Myers somewhere, someday never have to wonder if she's worthy of sitting in the front." Cameron nodded, his anger tempered by love and the weight of her words. "I hear you, Mom, but they need to feel this. It's not just about you. It's about all the people who don't have a son who can make phone calls that change things." He started the car, and they drove in silence toward downtown Denver, city lights flickering beneath the rising moon. Cameron dialed a number from memory, his voice shifting as he reached a high-level assistant at Skyward America. He identified himself, requested an immediate callback from the CEO, and made it clear that the matter was urgent and involved not only their largest minority investor but a documented incident of discrimination. Loretta listened, marveling at how her son had become the kind of man who never had to raise his voice to command respect. She felt a flicker of pride and sorrow intertwined, wishing her late husband could see this moment the promise of a legacy realized, the heartbreak of injustice still needing to be fought. They arrived at Cameron's apartment overlooking the city, a sleek modern space filled with art and photographs, family, friends, graduations, moments of joy and progress. Loretta sank gratefully into a soft armchair. She watched Cameron pace, phone pressed to his ear, as he began assembling a team of advisors and legal experts. He called his executive assistant, his company's head of legal, his trusted friend from a national news network. Meanwhile, Loretta sat in the quiet, her mind drifting to the students she had taught, the lessons she had tried to give them about the world's beauty and its danger. She thought of all the parents who had trusted her with their children, asking only that she help them believe in their own possibilities. How many of those young faces had been moved aside, made to feel small, told in 100 little ways that they did not belong. A gentle chime from her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a message from Samantha Price. "I'm home. I'm still thinking about what happened to you. Please let me know if I can help. My cousin is a reporter in Atlanta," Loretta replied with a short message of thanks. She wondered how many other people were reliving that flight tonight, hearts pounding with quiet anger or unexpected courage. She realized, with a start, that even humiliation could be a spark if it was shared, witnessed, transformed. By midnight, Cameron had secured a late-night video meeting with Alan McAllister, the CEO of Skyward America. Loretta watched as her son dialed in, surrounded by his legal team, his face composed but unyielding. Alan McAllister, appearing from his study in Chicago, looked tired and defensive. "Cameron, I want to apologize. We've already started an internal investigation. The crew reported an operational issue, but I assure you, if there's any evidence of discrimination, there will be consequences." Cameron's response was calm but cold. "Alan, there's evidence, multiple witnesses, video footage. My mother was moved to coach so a white VIP couple could have her seat. Your crew lied about operational needs. This is not just about an apology. It's about systemic failure and about what you're going to do next." Loretta listened quietly, feeling the strange power of being both the center of the story and invisible within it. She thought of how many times she had apologized for her own discomfort just to avoid conflict. How often she had seen men like Alan make promises that faded as soon as the headlines moved on. Alan's voice softened, the gravity of the moment catching up to him. "Mrs. Myers, I'm truly sorry for what you experienced. We failed you, and we failed our own values. Loretta spoke gently. An apology is a beginning, but it doesn't change what happened to me or what's happened to people like me for generations. What matters now is what you do, not just what you say. Alan nodded, his face shadowed by regret. You have my word. There will be action. Cameron ended the call with clear demands, public acknowledgement, immediate suspension of involved staff, a formal investigation, and a plan for real, transparent reform. He gave Alan 48 hours to respond or face public and financial consequences. When the call ended, Cameron turned to his mother, his features softening. I know you're tired, Mom, but if you want to make a statement, if you want to tell your story, the world is ready to listen. I'll support you whatever you choose. Loretta sat for a long moment, letting the offer settle around her. She felt the tension in her body begin to ease. She had not wanted to become a symbol, but she understood now that her dignity, her truth, mattered beyond herself. She nodded slowly. Yes, Cameron, let's do it. Let's tell the truth so that maybe, just maybe, it's the last time. That night, as city lights faded into darkness and sleep came at last, Loretta dreamed of the sky open, boundless, belonging to everyone. She dreamed of voices joining hers, small kindnesses multiplied, a world where moving someone from their rightful seat was unthinkable. The storm was gathering, but Loretta was ready to stand in the center, not just for herself, but for all those whose stories had never been told. Morning light spilled through the windows of Cameron's apartment, warming the kitchen in soft gold. Loretta Myers stood at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug of strong coffee, watching the city awaken beneath her. She had not slept deeply, her dreams troubled by the shifting faces of the flight crew, the silent stares of passengers, the awkward apologies and unfinished sentences. But with the sunrise, a quiet determination settled over her. Today, she would reclaim her narrative. No one would move her voice to the back of the line. Cameron moved around the kitchen, making calls in hushed tones. His manner was different than last night, less fire and more focus. Loretta admired the discipline in him he had learned, as she had that emotion alone would not win justice. Now, he needed strategy. The world would not simply bend to their outrage, but it might listen if they spoke with clarity, honesty, and vision. As she sipped her coffee, Loretta read messages from strangers across the country. Samantha Price had sent a note of encouragement and a promise. Our nurses' union wants to issue a statement supporting you. We see this every day, in different forms. Let's change it together. Monique Evans texted press conference confirmed for noon. Denver Post, ABC affiliate, and 2 national outlets attending. I've shared the video with trusted journalists. I'll be at your side. Please let me know if you want any ground rules or if there's anything you don't want shared. Loretta felt a tremor of anxiety. The prospect of facing cameras, of being asked to relive her humiliation in public, was daunting. She thought of the way stories could be twisted, reduced to sound bites or clickbait, the risk that her words would be used against her or forgotten altogether. But she also saw the faces of young black girls from her old classroom. She remembered the way they watched her for signs of how to behave when confronted with rudeness, injustice, or cruelty. She thought of Cameron as a boy, holding her hand tightly in a crowded grocery store when a cashier asked, "Are you sure you can afford that?" She set her mug down with new resolve. Cameron, if we're doing this, I want the focus on the bigger picture, not just on what happened to me, but on why it keeps happening and how we make it stop. He nodded, his gaze full of pride and concern. We'll do it your way. Mom, honest, strong, with your voice front and center. The hours moved swiftly. Monique arrived at the apartment, her presence both calming and energizing. She handed Loretta a folder of talking points, but Loretta pushed them aside with a smile. I know my story, Loretta said gently. I've been telling it my whole life. Together, they drove to the downtown hotel where the press conference would be held. Loretta sat in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap. Cameron and Monique strategizing quietly up front. She watched the Denver skyline slip past, feeling the magnitude of what lay ahead a moment when her private pain might finally mean something more. The hotel lobby was bustling with journalists, activists, and a few curious onlookers. Loretta's heart pounded as she stepped inside, but she walked tall, meeting each gaze with quiet strength. She was not here for spectacle. She was here for truth. The conference room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras were already set up, reporters reviewing notes, microphones lined along a long table at the front. Samantha Price stood near the door, waving as Loretta entered. Kevin Tran and Rachel, the young mother from the flight, also appeared, both eager to offer their accounts as witnesses. Loretta felt a powerful gratitude she was not alone, and neither was her story. The conference began. Monique introduced Loretta, then outlined the incident with a measured, legal clarity. This is not an isolated case, she said, her voice firm. It is a pattern across industries, in public and private spaces, wherever assumptions and unspoken rules decide who belongs and who does not. Loretta stepped to the microphone, pausing to steady her breath. The room quieted. Cameras focused on her lined face, her elegant posture, the soft blue of her suit. I want to thank everyone here for listening, Loretta began, her voice calm but resonant. Yesterday, I was moved from my seat in first class, not because I was late or disruptive or had done anything wrong. I was moved because a system, an invisible one, but no less powerful, decided that someone else was more entitled to that place. This is not just about a seat on an airplane. It's about how we decide who is seen, who is heard, and who is pushed to the margins. She let the words settle, meeting the eyes of each reporter in turn. I have lived through a great many changes in this country. I grew up in the segregated South, taught in underfunded schools, marched for rights that many now take for granted. But I have also seen how quickly old habits return, how easily dignity is taken for granted or stripped away in a moment's decision. Loretta glanced at Cameron, who nodded encouragingly. She continued, My hope is not for vengeance. I don't want to see only firings or lawsuits. What I want is transformation. I want to see training that actually changes hearts, leadership that measures success by how it treats its most vulnerable customers, and communities that look out for one another, as these fellow passengers did for me. Reporters asked questions, some careful, some blunt. Do you believe this was racial discrimination? Ms. Myers, what would you say to the CEO of Skyward America? Are you planning to sue? Loretta answered each with candor. Yes, I do believe race played a part. It is rarely explicit these days, but it is no less real. To the CEO, I would say, start listening, not just apologizing, build a company where dignity is not an afterthought. As for legal action, I trust Monique Evans to advise me. But what I want most is to see this never happen to anyone else." Samantha Price gave her account next, describing what she saw the awkwardness, the way Loretta's request for fairness was ignored, the indifference of the flight crew to her comfort after the move. Kevin Tran spoke about his own experiences with subtle prejudice, the power of solidarity, and the need for public accountability. Monique closed with a call for systemic reform. It is time for airlines and all corporations to move beyond shallow diversity statements and invest in genuine equity measured, enforced, and lived every day. By the end, the conference felt less like a spectacle and more like a gathering of voices. The press lingered, asking for follow-up interviews, requesting contact information for other witnesses. A news alert chimed on Monique's phone already. The story was trending on social media under the hashtag rightful seat. As Loretta left the hotel, she was stopped by a young woman in the lobby, her eyes brimming with tears. "Ms. Myers, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm a law student here. My grandmother's your age. She always said, 'Speak truth, even if your voice shakes.' You did that today." Loretta smiled, touched beyond words. "Thank you, dear. Don't ever let anyone move you aside, not in law, not in life." Outside, the spring air felt sweeter, the city somehow changed by a morning of hard honesty. Cameron took his mother's hand as they walked toward the car, their shadows long in the sunlight. "You did more than tell your story, Mom," he said softly. "You made space for all the others who need to tell theirs." Loretta squeezed his hand. "That's what teachers do, baby. We make space for learning and sometimes for justice." They drove home in silence, each lost in thought. Loretta gazed out the window, feeling both tired and exhilarated, the weight of years lighter than she'd expected. She knew there would be backlash, criticism, and perhaps moments of regret. But she also knew that the story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every person who had ever been asked to move, to step aside, to disappear. For the first time in a long while, she felt the world shifting slowly. Yes, but shifting toward something better. By late afternoon, news of Loretta Myers' ordeal had reached every corner of the country. Television anchors recounted the events in clipped, urgent tones. Social media swelled with debate, some voices outraged on Loretta's behalf, others skeptical or dismissive. The hashtag rightful seat soared into trend and status by evening, joined by new calls for industry reform. Old students from Augusta sent messages of encouragement. A childhood friend, now living in Detroit, texted, "You taught me never to bow my head. You're still teaching us all." Yet, even as the world responded, the private weight of the experience pressed down on Loretta's spirit. At Cameron's apartment, her phone vibrated ceaselessly with calls, texts, emails. Reporters wanted exclusive interviews. Friends wanted to know she was all right. Advocacy groups asked if she would consider lending her name to their efforts. Loretta felt the currents swirling around her, threatening to sweep her out to sea. She retreated to the quiet of Cameron's guest bedroom, closing the door gently behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, and for the first time since landing, allowed herself to weep not for the injustice alone, but for the exhaustion, the memories it summoned, and the knowledge that this story, once released into the world, could never be called back. She remembered the taste of fear as a young girl, clutching her mother's hand as they walked into a whites-only store in 1950s Georgia. She remembered the first time a student confided, "Ms. Myers, they treat us like we don't belong. The fight, always the fight, never seemed to end." Loretta pressed her palm to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. She whispered a prayer for strength, not just for herself, but for all those who would face similar battles after her. She dried her eyes, composed herself, and rejoined Cameron and Monique in the living room. Cameron was on the phone with Alan McAllister again, demanding specifics: what steps were being taken, what public statement would be issued, what consequences awaited the staff involved. Monique scrolled through a flood of emails, cataloging support and threats alike. The public was watching, and so were the powerful. That evening, Skyward America released its first official statement. "We are deeply sorry for the distress suffered by Ms. Loretta Myers. An immediate investigation is underway. The employees involved have been placed on leave. We are committed to reviewing all policies and ensuring that all passengers are treated with dignity and respect." The statement was carefully worded, apologetic but non-committal, with no names or direct admissions. The press pounced. "Is this enough?" asked one national anchor, playing footage from the press conference, then cut into interviews with advocacy leaders and, finally, to a recorded video from Loretta's former student, who said she gave so much to her community. It's time for the world to give back. Cameron's phone lit up with offers from law firms, publicists, industry watchdogs, and celebrities wanting to tweet in support. Loretta watched all of this unfold, both awed and wary. It was a strange new world, one where stories traveled faster than the truth could catch up, one where the dignity she had so carefully protected could be misunderstood, twisted, or appropriated for someone else's agenda. Monique sat beside her, offering a gentle presence. "It's overwhelming, isn't it? You don't have to respond to everyone. This is still your story. Loretta, you get to decide what comes next." Loretta nodded. She thought of her quiet kitchen back home in Augusta, the piece of her garden, the old church where voices rose in harmony each Sunday. She longed for those things, but she also knew she could not walk away, not now. That night, Cameron's legal team drafted a letter to Skyward America's board of directors. It laid out their demands: a formal, public apology from the CEO, clear discipline for every employee involved, the creation of a customer equity council with Loretta as honorary chair, and a timeline for implementing real training and policy changes. The letter included a veiled threat, a promise to escalate, to leverage both media and financial clout if the company's response proved inadequate. Cameron shared the letter with Loretta before sending it. She read it carefully, her fingers brushing each line. When she finished, she looked up at her son. "You're not just fighting for me, are you?" He shook his head. "No, Mom, I'm fighting for everyone who's ever been told to move for no good reason." She smiled, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in her eyes. "Then let's make sure this isn't just about punishment. Let's build something lasting." As the legal battle intensified, Loretta's story continued to echo outward. Monique fielded interview requests from national and local outlets. Samantha Price appeared on a morning show, describing the day from her perspective and calling for more than lip service from airline leaders. Kevin Tran's media group published a thoughtful op-ed, "What Ms. Myers Faced and Why None of Us Should Tolerate It." In Augusta, the local NAACP held a rally, using Loretta's story as a rallying cry for broader justice. If it can happen to Ms. Myers, it can happen to anyone, intoned the pastor from the pulpit. Students from Westside Middle School, where Loretta had once taught, organized a letter-writing campaign, flooding Skyward America's headquarters with handwritten pleas for change. Yet, with every surge of support, backlash followed. Online commentators questioned Loretta's motives. Some accused her of exaggerating. Others claimed she was being used as a pawn in larger political battles. The familiar ugliness of American discourse reared up. But for the first time in her life, Loretta was not facing it alone. One evening, Loretta received a call from Patricia Liu, Skyward America's newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer. Patricia's voice was steady, empathetic, and determined. "Ms. Myers, I want you to know I've read every account. I want to invite you to meet with me and our board to share your experience and help us shape the changes we so clearly need. Would you be willing?" Loretta hesitated, considering all that might be asked of her, the emotional labor, the risk of being tokenized, but she remembered her own promise to use this platform for others. "Yes, I would," she replied, "but only if it's real. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to see policies, people, and culture change." Patricia agreed. "That's exactly why we need you at the table." In the weeks that followed, a working group was formed, with Loretta as its honorary chair and Cameron as a consulting advisor. They drafted a new dignity in air travel initiative, which included comprehensive anti-bias training, independent oversight for passenger complaints, public reporting of equity benchmarks, and a permanent seat for passenger advocates on the airline's Customer Council. Skyward America agreed to sponsor scholarships for minority students interested in aviation and management. Loretta traveled to Dallas for the board meeting, her story now part of the official record. The atmosphere was tense but respectful as executives, employees, and advocates gathered in the glass-walled boardroom. She told her story again, not as an accusation but as an invitation to see, to hear, to change. After her testimony, the room fell silent. Patricia Liu spoke first. "Ms. Myers, thank you. Your courage has already changed this company. The CEO, Alan McAllister, stood. We owe you more than an apology. We owe you action for Loretta." It was not a final victory. She knew there would be setbacks, resistance, and more work ahead. But she also saw the power of a single story, multiplied by thousands, reaching the places where change is made. On the flight home, Loretta sat in the first class. The seat was comfortable, but what mattered more was the sense of possibility, the hope that her story had opened a door through which others could follow. As the plane ascended, Loretta watched the land fall away below, a patchwork of cities and forests, rivers and roads. She closed her eyes and allowed herself, at last, to rest. Weeks passed. The story of Loretta Myers had become a living thread in the fabric of the national conversation. News crews stood outside Skyward America's Dallas headquarters on the morning the new policies were announced. Activists posted her testimony on TikTok and Instagram. Every time Loretta scrolled through her messages, she saw her face sometimes aged and wise, sometimes small and vulnerable, shared by people she had never met, but who recognized something of themselves in her journey. At home in Augusta, the old house was filled with sun and spring birdsong, but peace came only in moments. Loretta's days had become a blur of calls with journalists, Zooms with policy teams, and restless afternoons pacing her living room as she waited for updates. Sometimes she wondered what her life would look like now if she had simply stayed quiet, simply moved to the back and let the memory fade. She never voiced these doubts to Cameron, who called every day to check in, but he sensed them anyway. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he phoned just as Loretta was folding laundry. She set down a towel, the familiar cotton weight oddly grounding. "You sound tired, Mom," Cameron said gently. Loretta hesitated, searching for the truth. "I am, baby. Not just from all this." She gestured to the neat stacks of letters and news clippings, but from holding the line so long. "Sometimes I'm not sure any of this will last. Sometimes I wonder if all I've done is stir the pot." Cameron was quiet for a moment. "You remember when I was a kid, and you told me not to be afraid of causing a little trouble if it meant doing what was right." She smiled, remembering his stubborn face at age 10, refusing to apologize for speaking up when a teacher had been unfair. "I remember. I also remember you broke a window once to rescue the neighbor's dog from the summer heat." He chuckled. "You told me then, if you're going to break something, let it be the silence. Mom, you didn't just stir the pot. You made people look at what was in it. That's what matters. It's not about one flight or one airline. It's about all the people who saw themselves in you and who won't be quiet now, either." Loretta listened, the worry in her chest slowly easing. "Thank you, Cameron, for seeing me, for making me brave when I feel small," he replied with the gentle authority she had instilled in him. "We do this together. Mom, you're not alone anymore." The next day, a letter arrived from Skyward America, signed personally by Alan McAllister and Patricia Liu. Inside was a formal invitation. Would Loretta join the inaugural Customer Equity Council, helping oversee the very changes she had demanded? They offered her an honorarium, travel support, and a promise that her input would help shape every major policy going forward. Loretta called Cameron. "They want me at the table," she said, "equal parts proud and overwhelmed." He smiled through the phone. "Then take your seat, Mom, and don't let anyone move you again." The next council meeting was set in Dallas, at Skyward America's new Innovation Center, a glass and steel building filled with artwork from every corner of the country. The other council members included activists, airline veterans, disability rights leaders, and a single mother from Chicago who had once been denied boarding because she was traveling with 3 children. Loretta's arrival was met with a quiet hush. Executives shook her hand. Young employees smiled nervously. In a conference room lined with sunlight, Patricia Liu welcomed everyone and outlined the agenda: full implementation of the Dignity in Air Travel Initiative, accountability for all complaints, and a live Q&A session with the press. Loretta felt both honored and deeply aware of the responsibility now on her shoulders. During the open discussion, Loretta spoke plainly, drawing on the grit of decades in the classroom. Change isn't just about a new handbook or a few firings. It's about how you answer the call at 3 a.m. when a single mother is stranded in a strange city, or how you look a nervous teenager in the eye and say, "You belong here." It's about every little moment, because the little moments are where dignity is either defended or denied. Patricia Liu nodded, taking notes. Alan McAllister, no longer defensive but attentive, listened closely as council members described the difference between performative diversity and lived equity. The discussion grew lively, sometimes tense, but Loretta watched with quiet pride as disagreements yielded to solutions. Afterward, she wandered the hallways, stopping by the break room where a handful of new employees sat with boxed lunches. A young black woman in a Skyward America blazer approached shyly. "Ms. Myers, I just wanted to thank you," she said. "When I heard your story, I almost quit. I thought, if it can happen to someone like you, what chance do I have? But seeing you here, taking your seat at the table, makes me want to stay, makes me want to make things better." Loretta's heart lifted. "Don't let them wear you down," she replied, her voice strong. "There's power in just being present, in refusing to disappear." Meanwhile, the backlash continued to swirl. An editorial in a national business paper accused Loretta of leveraging identity politics for personal gain. Anonymous emails called her a troublemaker, a disruptor, someone ruining the customer experience. She showed these to Cameron one night over video chat, her lips taut with a mixture of frustration and hurt. "Maybe I am a disruptor," she said quietly. "Maybe that's not so bad." Cameron nodded, pride shining in his eyes. "Nothing grows without a little disruption, and the only thing you're ruining is the old way of doing things." Despite the negativity, there was more light than shadow. At Augusta's Westside Middle School, her former students hosted a Dignity Day, inviting Loretta to speak via video. She watched as children performed skits about standing up for others, sang songs about inclusion, and shared essays titled "The Seat I Deserve." She wept openly, heart cracked wide by their hope. "I see you," she told them, her voice trembling but clear, "and I want you to know you deserve every good thing. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Back in Dallas, Skyward America's changes were already having an impact. Anonymous surveys showed fewer complaints, higher morale among staff, and greater satisfaction from passengers of color, disabled travelers, and families. The press began to shift its tone from scandal to transformation. National radio programs debated whether Loretta's story would become a model for other industries. Still, the work was far from over. At the next council meeting, a heated discussion broke out over how to handle a new case of bias at a regional airport. Loretta spoke up, her voice measured but insistent. "We cannot afford to let fatigue become an excuse," she said. "It's easy to do the right thing once. The real test is doing it again and again, even when no one is watching." Patricia Liu nodded. "We hear you, Loretta. We won't let up." After the meeting, as Loretta waited for her ride to the airport, Cameron called to check in. They talked about the council's progress, the small wins and big setbacks, and the work still to come. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Cameron said as the call ended, "not just for standing up, but for helping everyone else stand a little taller, too." Loretta looked out at the Texas sun blazing across the parking lot, her heart full. She thought of all the seats she had ever been asked to leave, all the rooms she had quietly entered, all the stories she carried. Now, her story was one of ripples of change moving outward, unstoppable, even when the work was hard. The world, she realized, was slowly making room. Spring turned to summer, and the changes set in motion by Loretta Myers's ordeal began to ripple outward in ways even she could not have imagined. The Dignity in Air Travel initiative at Skyward America was featured in a special segment on national news. Other airlines announced their own reforms, some more sincerely than others. Loretta found herself invited to policy summits, town halls, and video panels about equity, sometimes with CEOs and senators, sometimes with high school students from across the country. One morning in Dallas, Loretta arrived early at Skyward America's Innovation Center for a council meeting. She stood in the garden outside the glass-walled building, watching the sunlight catch the metallic wings of a sculpture meant to symbolize progress. She ran her fingers over the names engraved at the base: pioneers in aviation, inventors, pilots, and, recently added, advocates for inclusion. Someone had quietly added her name to the list. In small but unmistakable script, Loretta Myers, educator and advocate. Inside, Patricia Liu greeted her with a warm hug. "You've inspired more than you realize," Patricia said. "Our hiring pipeline is more diverse now. Employee complaints are down. We're finally starting to measure the right things." Alan McAllister was waiting in the boardroom. His manner had shifted since those first tense days. Now, his tone was thoughtful, even deferential, when he addressed Loretta and the council. "I've learned a lot from you, Ms. Myers," he said in the opening minutes of the meeting, "and I want to keep learning." This council session was different. They were not just responding to a crisis, but reviewing results, anticipating future challenges, and planning to share what worked across the entire industry. There were presentations on customer experience data, anonymous feedback, and reports of subtle bias still lingering at some outstations. Monique Evans, now lead legal counsel for the council, gave a summary of settlements and new cases, both the victories and the stubborn places where discrimination still found cracks to hide in. But what struck Loretta most was the way people spoke to one another honestly, sometimes painfully so, but without the old defensiveness. Leah Anderson, the support flight attendant who had witnessed Loretta's original removal, had been promoted to the training team. She now led a workshop called First Impressions, Lasting Impact, and spoke candidly to the council. "I used to think I was just following orders," Leah said, voice trembling slightly as she recalled that day. "But, Mrs. Myers helped me see that every choice, even the smallest one, can shape someone's whole journey. Now, I try to make sure no one ever feels unseen on one of our flights." At a break, Loretta found herself at a window overlooking the runway. Cameron joined her, coffee in hand, his phone set aside for once. "You're really changing things, Mom," he said, pride unmistakable in his voice. Loretta smiled, but her eyes were troubled. "It's never finished. You know, there's always another story, another person waiting to be seen." Cameron nodded, his expression turning serious. "Do you ever regret it standing up, going public?" She paused, considering the question. "Some days it's heavy, the backlash, the doubt, but I'd regret it more if I'd stayed silent. I just hope all this talk doesn't fade when the cameras are gone." He squeezed her hand. "That's why I'm here. That's why so many of us are here. To keep the promise." They sat together, quietly, letting the weight and the hope of the moment settle between them. That afternoon, a group of new Skyward America trainees entered the council chamber, part of a program now called Every Seat Matters. Loretta watched them take their places, eyes wide and expectant. She was invited to say a few words. She stood at the front, her voice steady but gentle. "I spent 40 years in classrooms, watching students grow, make mistakes, and learn. I never imagined I'd end up teaching in a boardroom, or that my lesson would be about something as simple and as complicated as belonging. My story is not unique. What happened to me has happened to so many. But the real change comes when the person in the uniform, the person with the clipboard, the person at the gate or in the cockpit, decides today everyone will be seen, Everyone will be safe. Everyone will get the seat they deserve. She paused, searching the faces in front of her. It's not just about policies or training modules. It's about the courage to interrupt the pattern, to say, "That's not right," even if it's uncomfortable. I hope you will be that kind of employee. I hope you'll be that kind of person. After the session, one of the trainees approached her, his voice nervous. "Ms. Myers, do you ever get tired of telling your story?" She smiled. "Sometimes, but every time I see someone new listening, someone really hearing, it makes it worth it." Meanwhile, the effects of Loretta's stand continued to ripple beyond the airline industry. Westside Middle School in Augusta reported higher enrollment in its Civic Voices program, where students studied social justice and wrote letters to policymakers. Local businesses began to review their own hiring and customer service practices. Monique Evans, energized by her partnership with Loretta, launched an initiative to mentor young attorneys of color entering the field of civil rights law. Loretta's social media inbox filled with messages from strangers I was told to move on a train last year. "I wish I'd stood up like you." "My daughter watched your news interview and asked, 'Can I be like her?' Thank you." Of course, there were also reminders of the world's stubbornness. One day, while traveling back from Dallas, Loretta encountered a gate agent at a different airline who eyed her first-class boarding pass with thinly veiled skepticism. The moment stung, but she met the gaze head-on, and this time the agent's attitude softened. A small victory, but proof that change is measured in inches as well as miles. Later that summer, Skyward America unveiled a mural at Denver International Airport, featuring faces of real passengers from all walks of life. Loretta attended the dedication, standing beside Samantha Price and Kevin Tran, both of whom had become close friends since that fateful flight. They gazed at the mural together, reflecting on how a single injustice had opened a door for so many stories to be heard. As the ceremony ended, Patricia Liu presented Loretta with a commemorative plaque for your courage, compassion, and unyielding commitment to justice. "We honor you," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. Loretta looked at the faces in the crowd, her son, her colleagues, strangers, and friends, and felt the magnitude of all that had changed, and all that still needed to be done. She took the microphone for one last time that day. "This isn't my ending," she said, voice strong. "It's a beginning. The work goes on in every airport, every office, every school. Don't wait for someone else to be the first to stand up. Sometimes, the most ordinary seat can be the one that changes everything." As the applause washed over her, Loretta felt something inside her settle, a quiet satisfaction, an acceptance of both her role and her limits. She was not the only teacher now. The lesson belonged to everyone. As autumn approached, the world around Loretta Myers shifted again. Leaves turned from emerald to gold across Georgia, and the evening sun fell lower in the sky each day. In her small backyard, Loretta found peace tending to the old rose bushes she had planted decades ago, watching their blooms brighten against the fence. She sometimes wondered how a single injustice, played out on an ordinary flight, had led her to this point, a place of public recognition, advocacy, and, most unexpectedly, healing. The work had been both heavier and more rewarding than she'd ever imagined. On a brisk Saturday, Loretta received a letter on heavy cream paper, marked with the Skyward America seal. It was from Patricia Liu, the Chief Diversity Officer, inviting Loretta to deliver the keynote address at the airline's annual leadership summit in Denver. The summit, Patricia explained, would gather employees from every level, from senior executives to the newest flight attendants, all of whom had been required to complete the new dignity in air travel training. For a moment, Loretta hesitated. She had spoken so often now, shared her story in interviews and boardrooms, council meetings and classrooms. What more could she say? What more could she give? But deep down, she knew that the story was not just hers anymore. It had grown beyond her, and she felt a duty to see it through. Cameron called that evening, catching her in the kitchen. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently. Loretta chuckled. "I've spoken to Congress, baby. A ballroom full of airline folks can't scare me now." They both laughed, sharing a sense of pride and relief. Loretta felt the connection between them, mother and son, partners in change, each buoying the other. When the day of the summit arrived, Loretta was greeted at Denver International Airport not with suspicion, but with warmth. A young black pilot, Captain Teresa Williams, met her at the gate and insisted on carrying her bag. "Ms. Myers, I grew up hearing your story," Teresa said, smiling shyly. "You made it possible for someone like me to wear these wings." Loretta's heart swelled at the sight of the young woman, so full of promise, a living answer to all the doubts and pain that once threatened to overshadow her legacy. At the summit, the ballroom buzzed with anticipation. Alan McAllister, the CEO, greeted Loretta with gratitude and humility. "You taught us that dignity isn't just a policy, it's a practice. We're still learning. Thank you for pushing us to do better." Patricia Liu introduced Loretta to the crowd. The applause was thunderous, but Loretta waited for it to quiet before she spoke. She began softly, drawing the audience in. "I've had a long life, and I've spent most of it teaching first in classrooms, then in boardrooms, and now, it seems, in the skies. I used to believe that change happened with big gestures, marches, lawsuits, public outcry, but what I've learned is that real change happens in the quiet moments, when someone decides, 'Not this time, not on my watch.'" She looked out over the rows of attentive faces. "The day I was asked to move from my seat, I felt the old pain, the sense that no matter what I had achieved, someone else's comfort mattered more than my dignity. But I also felt something else, a quiet refusal. I would not disappear, and when my son stood up for me, he did what I had taught him all his life. He said, 'You are worthy, your place matters.' That is all any of us ever want." Loretta spoke about the small acts that accumulate into culture, how the brief smile of a gate agent, the fairness of a boarding process, the empathy of a flight attendant could transform the journey for every passenger. She urged the leaders in the room to remember that justice is not achieved with one apology or one firing, but through persistent attention, humility, and courage to interrupt old patterns. She finished with a story about her roses, how the oldest ones, battered by wind and time, bloomed most brightly after a hard winter. Change isn't always fast. Sometimes it's slow and stubborn. But if you tend it, if you keep showing up, you'll look up one day and find something beautiful growing where you once saw only pain. The standing ovation was long and heartfelt. Tears shone in the eyes of many who approached Loretta afterward to thank her, to share their own stories, to pledge to carry the lesson into their own lives. After the summit, Cameron joined her for a quiet dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the city. The skyline twinkled as the sun dipped low, and the mood was gentle, almost celebratory. "You know, Mom," Cameron said, stirring his coffee, "I used to think the only way to win was to fight harder, be louder. But watching you, seeing how you mix strength and compassion, I understand now. It's not just about breaking down walls. It's about opening doors for the people coming after us." Loretta reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Cameron, and of all the people who helped us along the way. This was never just my victory." They talked late into the evening about family, the friends they'd gained, the ones they'd lost, the power of community. Loretta shared her worries too, the ones that lingered in the quiet hours. Would the changes last? Would the lessons stick? When her story faded from the news, Cameron listened, then replied, "Legacy isn't a headline, Mom. It's the way people treat each other when nobody's watching." Back in Augusta, Loretta returned to her routines, gardening, reading, mentoring neighborhood children. Yet, everywhere she went, someone would stop her to thank her, to tell her she had inspired them, to share a small story of kindness or courage. She realized that, though her own flight was over, the journey for so many others had just begun. One bright afternoon, she was invited to a local school to read to a group of children. She chose a book about courage, her voice soft and steady. Afterward, a little girl in the front row asked, "Ms. Myers, what do you do if someone says you don't belong?" Loretta knelt down, looked into her eyes, and answered. You look them in the eye, and you say, "I do belong, I have a place, and so do you." And then you show them what dignity looks like. The story of Loretta Myers became a lesson told in classrooms, in training seminars, in homes and churches. Skyward America's policies were studied in business schools as a model for meaningful reform. Monique Evans expanded her legal initiative. Kevin Tran's news outlet won an award for its coverage, and Samantha Price was elected to a National Nurses Union position, where she continued advocating for equity in health care. Yet the heart of the story remained simple. A mother, quietly dignified, refused to let herself be moved aside. A son, shaped by her strength, wielded his power for justice, not just for his family but for all those left behind. Together, and with the help of allies and strangers, they had transformed pain into possibility, exclusion into belonging. 6 months after the summit, Loretta received a photograph in the mail. It was of Captain Teresa Williams and her crew, smiling proudly in their uniforms beside a Skyward America jet. The caption read, "For Ms. Myers, because every seat is the right seat." Loretta pinned the photo on her refrigerator, next to pictures of her family and the thank you cards from her students. She stood quietly for a moment, allowing herself a smile. The world had not changed overnight, but it was changing, little by little, seat by seat, story by story. As dusk fell across her garden, Loretta stepped outside to breathe the cool air. She watched the sky, wide and open, filled with the promise of countless journeys yet to come. And in her heart, she knew that what mattered most was not where you sat, but whether you stood firm and gentle, for yourself and for others, until dignity was as common and unremarkable as the air itself. Loretta's story began with humiliation, but it ended in hope. From the moment she was told to give up her seat, her quiet refusal and her son's unwavering support became a spark that lit up boardrooms, classrooms, and countless hearts across the country. What we witnessed was not just a battle for a chair on an airplane. It was a stand against the old, invisible forces of bias and exclusion. Loretta's courage reminded us that justice is not just about shouting the loudest, but about never letting anyone shrink your worth. As you reflect on this journey, let it stir something deeper in you, the love between a mother and her son, the power of dignity under fire, and the hard truth that discrimination still haunts even the most ordinary moments. But remember, too, that change is possible. Policies can be rewritten, hearts and minds can open, if enough of us refuse to look away. If you've ever felt unseen, or watched someone you care about be treated as less than, let this story give you strength. Stand tall, be the person who makes room for others, and never forget what happened to Loretta could happen to anyone, until we all demand better. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that challenge injustice and celebrate our shared humanity. Stay with us for the next journey.